Iraq has been a hotbed of anti-government protests for several years, with citizens expressing their deep dissatisfaction with the country's political and economic situation. These protests, often massive in scale and scope, stem from a multitude of factors, including rampant corruption, poor public services, high unemployment rates, and political instability. The country's youth, who form a significant portion of its population, have been particularly vocal, expressing their frustration over a future that seems bleak and unpromising. Corruption is one of the primary drivers of these protests. Iraq, rich in oil resources, has been plagued by systemic corruption that has siphoned off its wealth, leaving little for public services and infrastructure. The Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index consistently ranks Iraq as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. This corruption is seen in almost all sectors, from basic utilities to the highest levels of government, fueling public anger and distrust. The failure to provide basic services like electricity, clean water, and healthcare has further exacerbated the public's frustration. Despite its oil wealth, Iraq struggles with frequent power outages, particularly during the sweltering summer months. The lack of reliable basic services is not just a matter of discomfort, but significantly impacts the quality of life, contributing to the public's outrage against the government. High unemployment, especially among the youth, is another critical factor. Iraq's young population faces a grim job market, with few opportunities for employment. This lack of prospects is particularly disheartening, given the country's wealth potential. The unemployment crisis is often attributed to the government's failure to diversify the economy and create job opportunities outside the oil sector. The sectarian and ethnic divisions in Iraq play a significant role in the protests. The government, often accused of being sectarian in its policies, has alienated large segments of the population. This has led to a feeling of disenfranchisement among various ethnic and religious groups, further fueling the protests. Political instability and the lack of a coherent government response have also contributed to the unrest. The government's inability to form a stable and effective administration has led to a vacuum of leadership. This instability has left the government ill-equipped to address the protesters' demands, exacerbating the situation. The involvement of foreign powers in Iraq's internal affairs has been a contentious issue and a rallying point for protesters. Many Iraqis feel that their country's sovereignty is compromised by the influence of countries like the United States and Iran. This external interference is perceived as a major obstacle to Iraq's political and economic independence. The legacy of the 2003 US-led invasion and subsequent occupation has had long-lasting effects on Iraq's political landscape. The dismantling of Saddam Hussein's regime and the ensuing power vacuum led to years of violence and instability, laying the groundwork for many of the issues Iraq faces today. This historical context is important in understanding the depth of the current dissatisfaction. Social media has played a significant role in fueling the protests. It has provided a platform for young Iraqis to voice their grievances and organize demonstrations. The use of social media has also helped bring international attention to their cause, although it has also made protesters targets for government surveillance and repression. The COVID-19 pandemic has added another layer of complexity to Iraq's situation. The economic downturn caused by the pandemic has further strained the country's already struggling economy, leading to increased hardship for many Iraqis. The pandemic also limited the ability of protesters to gather, although it did not quell their determination. The Iraqi government's response to the protests has often been heavy-handed, involving the use of force and the detention of protesters. This response has only served to increase public anger and deepen the divide between the government and its citizens. The violent crackdowns have also raised concerns about human rights violations and the state of democracy in Iraq. There is a sense of betrayal among many Iraqis who feel that their government has failed to deliver on the promises of the post-Saddam era. The hope for a democratic, prosperous Iraq has been replaced by disillusionment, as many feel that the current political class is no better than the previous regime. The influence of tribal and familial affiliations in Iraqi politics has hindered the development of a merit-based system and perpetuated a cycle of patronage and corruption. This system has prevented the emergence of new political voices and has stifled efforts at reform. The degradation of Iraq's educational and healthcare systems has also been a point of contention. Years of conflict and neglect have left these crucial systems in disrepair, impacting the future prospects of Iraq's youth and the health of its population. The lack of progress in rebuilding and developing areas that were devastated by the conflict with the Islamic State has led to further disillusionment. Many Iraqis feel abandoned by their government, which has failed to adequately address the destruction and displacement caused by the war. The protests in Iraq represent a deep-seated frustration with a political system that is perceived as corrupt, ineffective, and unresponsive to the needs of its people. The protesters' demands are not just for economic reform, but for a fundamental change in the way Iraq is governed. In conclusion, Iraq's anti-government protests are fueled by a complex mix of economic woes, political dysfunction, and social issues. The failure of the government to address these concerns has led to widespread disillusionment and anger, driving citizens to the streets in protest. The resolution of this crisis requires not just economic reform, but a complete overhaul of the political system to create a more inclusive, transparent, and effective governance structure. Thanks for watching Middle East Info. Please consider liking and subscribing for more insightful content on this fascinating region.